Good morning. Bill and I recently headed down to Riviera Beach to do some diving. We wanted to dive at Blue Heron Bridge. We found an Airbnb that was right on the water, and I will have to say I highly recommend this method of diving at Blue Heron Bridge. There are a whole lot of reasons why this is just absolutely superior to parking at Phil Foster Park. One of the reasons is, as you can see, you can take your cart and roll your gear right down to the water and not have to worry about the security of it. The other, of course, is that you don't have to fight for parking because you're already parked at your Airbnb. Here you can see right across to the bridge, and right beyond that catamaran is the area that we plan to dive, and to that north section, we were south of the bridge, that north section is where there's a lot more diving going on now. I've been playing around with a new lens from Backscatter. It's got the red filters on it for an older GoPro, and so I'm just kind of messing around to see which view of it looks better. The water entry here was pretty good. We had a ladder and we sorted out how to set up all of our gear along the seawall, and this was the curious serval that was hanging out with us, Simba. So we would get our gear all staged by the water, and then just one of us get in the water and hand the other person on shore would hand that person their gear, and then kind of reverse the whole procedure with the camera being last. It worked pretty well. We dove not only a couple high tides but also a low tide. Once we got in the water, there was a bit of a swim, which actually we found out later we could drop right there and start looking at things, but we needed to swim past that catamaran and then descend and check and see what sort of visibility we had, and we were absolutely stunned. The visibility was really, really good. Bill's been working with some of his Kraken lights and white balance and such, and getting a little bit more comfortable with his camera, and I've been working with just an old GoPro is what I'm using. Right there I'm checking to see if the tide really is nearly slack, and also just admiring what kind of visibility we had getting down there. Once we got down there, immediately, of course, some things got our attention. There was a starfish that we could do some practice on. Gave me the chance to flip those filters back and forth so that later on I could look at it and figure out which I liked better. There's a little bit of decision to be made. The filters might say they're good for 5 to 10 feet, but what if you're at 11 feet? What if the sun is more overhead? What if it's not quite as bright? So many things to just experiment with and experience and figure out how it works. Once we had our excitement of seeing the first couple bits of sea life, of course I got caught up in these absolutely gorgeous sea urchins. I think I'd never seen white sea urchins, and we saw several different colors of starfish. We saw these fireworms. They were amazing when we saw them at night, and I'll see if I can put together a video of our night dive, because that was, of course, a whole nother world. Like I said, visibility was a little bit surprising. I was thrilled, absolutely thrilled. And so next we started to swim toward the pilings that were to the north of the property where we are, and then head more toward the actual bridge. A lot of people have been diving that area just because not only are there wrecks, but along that whole section there's all sorts of sea life to be seen. One of the great things about staying in that Airbnb south of the bridge was we could do a drift dive up to the bridge, then dive the full 45 minutes, and then another drift dive back to our Airbnb on the outgoing tide. There's another place I'll give you some information about in another video. I'll show you our Airbnb in another place that we looked at that's north of the bridge, and give you some considerations for the pros and cons of both of those. One of the things about diving at Blue Heron Bridge is you really need to slow down and just kind of sit still for quite a while, and you'll be amazed at what you see. There are so many crabs. We must have seen 8 or 10 different varieties of crabs. There are all these shrimp, and they're the really big, long-legged, prehistoric looking shrimp. All of this section right here, we didn't realize it, but we were in the area right next to where there's a black seahorse, and also a couple baby seahorse that were, the first time they were seen, they were about 1 inch long, and after that, the last week they've been seeing them, they've been about 2 inches long. So I would recommend to you that when you get to Riviera Beach, pop into Force E before your first dive and ask them where to find the seahorses, because that's really what we wanted to look for. Here, Bill's getting me to do a little bit of a shot of his new watch. I'll have to ask him which one that was. Here I'm just trying to show you the visibility. I couldn't believe, I think it was like 40 or 50 feet that we could see. Now we're going to head closer up under the bridge, and diving under the bridge is sort of like a night dive in itself. It's really a completely different experience. The ground around is a little bit barren like this, and you think that you're not seeing anything, but if you slow down and really look, there's all sorts of creatures, even in those sort of barren looking areas. This type of growth is exactly what those seahorses like to hide in. They look like it. Aw, love. Or maybe it's war. I don't know which that was. But the seahorses like to hide in that kind of, that growth looks just like seahorses. So the camouflage is absolutely perfect. The night before we did this, we just watched David Attenborough's, I think it's one of his Life series, and it was all about how different animals camouflage their colors, how they'll change colors to adapt to their environment. And there's also a lot about kind of like green screen work, where how tigers actually look brown and white and tan to us, but to their predators they don't, and how zebras use the stripes to confuse. Absolutely fascinating. So as we dove, I was thinking about a lot of these things. Are the colors really what I think I'm seeing? This fish is very energetically guarding her eggs there. I was worried that I was going to disturb her, but it was just such, the color, the eggs was so beautiful, and I've seen this so many times down at Blue Heron Bridge, so I ended up moving away. I didn't want to upset her. Just, I couldn't believe how clear the shots on the GoPro were. This is an older GoPro I'm using. It's nothing fancy. I will tell you, I have a little bit of trouble figuring out exactly where I am aiming, where I'm shooting, and I had chosen to use the GoPro without the screen on the back so that my battery would last longer, because like I said, with 45 minutes before, half an hour during, 45 minutes after the high tide for the slack tide that you dive here, I knew that I needed a lot of battery power. Look at that visibility. Isn't it absolutely amazing? The fish were, we didn't see a whole lot of huge fish. We saw a lot of small fish. We saw barracuda, triggerfish, drum, sheephead, permit. Oh gosh, I can't even think of all the different kinds of fish that we saw. She's still guarding her eggs. The different colors of starfish were also a little bit interesting. Some of them were more yellow, some were more orange, some were kind of a pale white, and I really wanted to get some footage of one of these starfish creeping along. This one unfortunately was really calm, but I did have a fish give me a little bit of love there. But yeah, I just couldn't seem to get much of that action. It's absolutely amazing when they tense one area and expand another area in order to move. I'll have to do some research and see why are some of these so orange and some of them so pale. Heading over to the bridge, first you come across some of the, I don't know if it's like broken piers from the bridge, and I'm checking the tide again, always checking that tide, but you come across some of these half piers. I don't know if they were broken off purposely or if they just worn through. Maybe they're from an old bridge, but once you get under here, the light is really startling. Like Bill said, it's like enjoying a night dive. You can have your light on and see a bit, have your light off, and experience what that's like, but you always feel quite safe because you can see the light on the other side of the bridge. It's not scary. A little bit nervous about getting my float caught, but that would be the only thing. This group of fish was just absolutely fascinating. This also tells us that the tide is still coming in because they're just kind of holding against it, and this was, like I said, we did a drift dive toward the bridge. But just watching them and seeing these enormous angelfish. I mean, this thing was as big as a basketball, and she just kept going around and around and around. Actually, there were a couple of them. Fascinating to look at. At this point, again, I was thinking about David Attenborough's piece about the colors of animals and how they use that color to camouflage, and this would be kind of like zebras. This was a sea cucumber. I could tell he'd been there quite a long time from his leavings. And this, I just wanted to show what the visibility was like. I mean, you could see so far in the distance. On the north side of the bridge is the other place that I'll show you later on if you subscribe. I'll give you a walkthrough tour of Open Water Resort that's to the north of the bridge, and I'll be discussing what the challenges and the differences are if you were diving from north of the bridge versus diving from south of the bridge. Isn't this guy beautiful? I mean, the coloring is just absolutely gorgeous. I saw it, and then Bill came over and brought his light, and I don't know why it is, but it seems like every time I see a stingray, there's also a flounder. Does that happen to anybody else? Here's Bill's light now, and I'm trying to let him know that there's a flounder down there, and look how amazingly camouflaged these things are. Just absolutely beautiful. After I followed this one, then I had quite the spectacular time of seeing a really large southern ray, and Bill says he thinks that this was feeding on something. I'm not sure if that's what was going on, but it was just gorgeous to get down at the level of this big sea monster and watch it work. And I mean, look at that tail, look at the arms, fins, whatever they're called, flukes. Just look at what's going on here. Absolutely stunning. And this was large. This one was probably, if I stretched my arms out, which would be about 5.5, 6 feet, that's how big it was. One thing Bill had been working on was doing some light balance, and around this area we saw a lot of lobster. We saw these little guys, and just fascinating. There was a tiny little drummer fish in there. Oh, lobster! And look at that. Isn't it kind of spooky and eerie? It reminds me of Stonehenge or something. More of these fish. This was, I could tell, the hull of a sailboat just from the curve of it. This is the sailboat that's kind of a little bit south and about mid-channel. I had never seen a horseshoe crab except dead on the beach, so that was just kind of an exciting thing to see there. One thing I don't think I've got in this video is there were stonefish everywhere, and I looked, and stonefish are supposedly the deadliest fish on earth, and I kept worrying that when we would pause to take video or take a picture, I'm checking the tide again, that when you pause, what if you didn't have good buoyancy, and what if your knee came down on one? Boy, that would be quite a mess. I believe that was a trunkfish there. Here we're just working our way back, bit of a drift dive back. I got to see that's a spotted eagle right way in the distance. Couldn't get really close to it, but the visibility was coming down a little bit as the tide was going out. Here we've got our visual cue of that sailboat. We did notice that there was a group that maybe it was too rough offshore, it was just a beginner class, but they actually came and tied up to these abandoned pilings and let all their divers off right there. There's our Airbnb. And because we were able to dive for such a long time, we did, I think Bill had almost run out of air. He was at 500 pounds, so he's swimming back on the surface, and I still had probably 1,000 pounds left. And so I was just enjoying looking at every last little thing, making that dive last a little bit longer. And then I saw something. Look at that. Jewelry. I couldn't believe it. I picked it up and I thought, I recognize this pattern. It's that Bulgari ring I've been lusting after, but alas, no, it was not the Bulgari ring. It actually was a nice dupe, but kind of funny to find something like that. My heart didn't really leap. I just was ecstatic. Getting out of the water was no big deal. Toss our gear up and out we go. Thanks for joining me on this dive with Blue Heron Bridge. Hope to see you in a future video, and I'll show you those Airbnb and the other places that are available to stay. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Bye.